Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. This week, in honor of the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, we're doing all of our content on the Battle of Leyte Gulf. One of the most common questions we get asked is, what was New Jersey doing during the battle? And like, there's the surface level answer of, she's escorting this task force and blah, 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 Halsey's flagship. But people ask that question because they want more detail. So we've got several resources here that we've been looking at recently that can really drill into what the ship was doing on more of an hour-by-hour basis throughout the battle. So these resources that we have in front of us, and we're down in the collection space right now of the museum: the ship's war diary, the ship's after-action report for the battle, the ship's deck log for the time period, and the diary of an enlisted sailor. This guy was a machinist's mate that he kept throughout his time on board, and especially during the battle. This is particularly interesting because diaries and personal photography were two things that you were not supposed to do during World War II, because if something happened, you're captured, the ship sinks or whatever, somebody recovers this, now they've got a whole heck of a lot of information about what you were doing and where you were going.
Of course, we were never told anything which made sense, because if you were captured, then you had nothing to tell the Japanese. But we could figure things out, and we knew we were storming north.
And this sailor, Phelps here, keeps all the information that you're not supposed to in his diary. What's most interesting about Phelps's diary is, one, he's a pretty good artist, but more so, he's just a machinist man. I think he's a machinist mate, third class, maybe second class at the time of the battle. And he has a pretty good idea of what's going on. It's not things like scuttlebutt is this, and it's completely wrong. The things that he knows that's going on and he's writing about is identical to what's in these other reports. So what that's telling us is that the crew of the ship, the enlisted crew, even lower ranking guys, are being told what the ship is doing on a fairly regular basis. And that's got to mean that somebody on the bridge, somebody near those command and control spaces, is like making 1MC announcements throughout the engagement and letting them know what's happening. We know that this is something that's fairly standard near the end of the career of the Iowa-class battleships. Captain Case, the final commanding officer of Missouri, talks about how he would go over the 1MC and give a play-by-play of the battle, because so much of the ship's crew is down below in spaces like this one where we're below the waterline. There's no windows, there's nowhere where you can see where you're going. So you just have no idea. You've been standing at general quarters for hours, maybe days. Like during this battle, it's a multi-day battle, and you've got no information about what's happening. So it seems like that even during World War II, it was fairly standard for the captain of the ship or officer of the deck or whoever to get on the 1MC and fairly regularly update folks on what was happening. So that's interesting to see from this journal. Now, it's common knowledge that Battleship New Jersey is operating with the carrier task forces. So she is sailing north towards Admiral Ozawa's northern force. And then later in the day, during the Battle of Samar, Halsey has to take her and the other battleships south to go towards the Battle of Samar. And so she misses both Cape Engano and Samar. But how quickly does she go? What speed is she operating at? Is the crew at general quarters? Are they preparing for surface action, any aircraft action? Are they firing their guns at all? Like, are they being attacked by aircraft during all this? These are all interesting questions that aren't answered by the short narrative, but between these various documents, you get some really good information on that. The crew is largely at general quarters throughout this time period. Condition Z is set, which means the ship is in its strictest watertight configuration during much of the battle. They are likely not preparing a lot of food. The cooks often manning the aircraft guns and things like that. So It's usually cold food, sandwiches, easily made, things like that that are being carried around to the different folks. So the guys on board are really roughing it, even if they aren't in a stand-up, knockdown fight with the enemy. Throughout all of these various reports, there's no evidence that New Jersey fires her guns once during the battle, particularly during the October 25th time period. The only evidence of battle that shows up in these, they see an explosion near Cabot operating in New Jersey's task force about 2 miles away from the ship, about 4,000 yards away. And that might be an anti-aircraft shell hitting the water, it might be an enemy aircraft being downed, but New Jersey isn't engaging targets at this time. It's not a direct involvement. During the run to the north, over the night of the 24th into the morning of the 25th, the battleship tops out at a speed of about 25 knots. So that's a pretty standard high speed for the carrier task forces. They can go a little bit faster. The slowest members of these task forces are probably the battleships of the South Dakota and North Carolina classes. They top out at about 27, 28 knots. So that's about the max speed these task forces can go. So going around 25 is pretty good. Halsey's trying to get into position for a dawn strike. Makes sense. They're heading north there. Interestingly, during the run back south, New Jersey does get up to a top speed of 28 knots. Again, she's operating with some of those other slower, fast battleships. So even though she can do a few knots more than this, and I've never actually seen any records from the ship in combat where she does more than 31 knots. So even though she is technically capable of 33 knots under wartime conditions and having been in combat for a while now, some of the equipment's not operating properly. There's growth on the hull. She's been in warm, salty water. So she probably can't do 33 knots, but 30, 31 is probably her max. She's doing 28. So that is the ship really hauling butt back down south. That makes it sound like Halsey's really rushing to get there, and in reality, he isn't. The ship stops multiple times during both the run to the north and the run to the south for refueling. She's refueling the destroyers operating alongside of her. That slows her down to 16 knots, which is still pretty fast for an underway replenishment. So she's not doing this high-speed run for the entire time. There's also several times during this time period where other ships come alongside and deliver mail to the battleship. And even a period where a Japanese POW named Nishimura is brought on board the battleship so that he can be interrogated by Halsey's staff. He only gets picked up on the 26th, and Halsey's staff doesn't actually have any Japanese speakers on it to interrogate him, so they try to have Halsey's Filipino steward communicate with them. Obviously, Filipino and Japanese are two extremely different languages, so that doesn't really work. So he's transferred off relatively soon after that. Let's wrap this up with a little bit from the diary here of Machinist Mates Feltz. October 25th, 0350 Reveille, 0400 Breakfast, 0515 GQ. Our task group made from 25 to 28 knots all night, and we joined up and formed a battle line with Washington, South Dakota, Massachusetts, and Alabama, with cruisers and destroyers in Task Force 34. We are 200 miles east of Luzon, between two Jap task forces. Jap is his word, not mine. One which contains at least 3 battleships, 8 heavy cruisers, carriers and destroyers. Captain wants all hands alert. Looks like today is it. USS Princeton was scuttled last night, and cruiser Birmingham damaged while taking off crew from explosions. Our carriers are low on bombs, but we have plenty of 16-inch shells. Our carriers are about 25 miles behind us in another task group. All ships have their large battle flags flying. So see all this information in here? Some of it is like day-to-day stuff you'd expect to see in a journal. Woke up at 3:50, that sort of stuff. But like the information about them being between multiple Japanese task forces, the components of those task forces, the captain wants everybody alert. So it sounds like the captain's coming over the 1MC and telling them stuff. But then there's also these awesome insights that you don't otherwise get about the battle. The battle flags are flying. 6:30, bright sky. We relinquished fleet guide to Massachusetts, so Japs, again, his word, not mine, won't know we are the flagship. About 110 planes passed overhead on their way to strike the Japs. That's at 6:30. At 7:35, one of our search planes has located the Jap task force of 17 ships 60 miles off our starboard bow. We have set a course to intercept them and attack. So again, this level of detail, the distance to the enemy ship, the fleet, the size of the enemy fleet, that is really surprising to see in a journal. Speeded up to 25 knots, task group 38.3 reported under air attack. 8:45, first airstrike sunk one large ship which was hit on the stern, followed by a big explosion. Probably a heavy cruiser, damaged one light cruiser and two carriers, which are burning fiercely. One carrier still untouched. 9:45, Japs are now retreating to north at 20 knots. They have split in two groups of 7 and 5 ships, or of 7 ships each. We are doing 20 knots on a course of 330 degrees, attempting to intercept. 10:20, search plane reports 3 ships dead in the water. Admiral Halsey ordered plane to hit undamaged ships in Jap task force, saying, "Big boy," U.S. battleships, "will finish off the cripples." 10:25, men released to eat chow. 10:48, general alarm rang. You know, with nearly 3,000 sailors on board, everybody didn't get chow in that 20-minute window. Group of 8 bogies coming in 25 miles out, cap shot down bogey, and one after another a short while ago. 11:24, started sending men to chow again. 12:10, secured from general quarters, rigging starboard side to fuel destroyers. From all indications, we were played for suckers. Coming up here from San Bernardino Straits after the task force. General MacArthur is calling for help off of Leyte, and Admiral Nimitz is supposed to have sent a message to Admiral Halsey asking where the hell the Third Fleet is. Rumors say Jap BBs went in and raised hell with old BBs and invasion beachhead in support of their own invasion force. Crews up in the air at this turn of events, and the rumors that are floating about.
But it wasn't. We were completely sucked out. The Jap fleet during the night turned around and came back through the straits, and they headed south for Leyte. What they ran into was those jeep carriers. They sunk a couple of them. But in any event, by the time we got the news, we were too far north. We turned around. Halsey left some of the cruisers behind, and he left the carriers, some of our carriers, to handle that outfit up there. And we were headed south again for the Surigao Straits. We pounded along all night long. When we got there, everything was empty. It was all over. That's another frustrating thing for the 16-inch gun guys, you know? Boy, were they down in the mouth, I'll tell you.
So again, this is wild information for a regular deck plate sailor to have. 4:50, completed fueling 2 DDs. 5:02, 28 knots rung up. We have in our task group now Iowa, New Jersey, 3 cruisers and 7 destroyers. Other task group of BBs on another mission. We are supposed to intercept the Jap BBs off San Bernardino Strait between midnight and 2 a.m. tonight and be prepared for night surface action. They were supposed to have raised all kinds of hell with our task force off of Leyte. This was the task force our planes were thought to have crippled yesterday. 7th Fleet was supposed to take care of Jap task force coming up south by Mindanao. Our report said 4 Jap BBs came out of San Bernardino Straits. Another Jap task force is bottled up in Surigao Straits with old BBs on one end, cruisers and carriers on the other. They have 1 BB dead in the water, 2 DDs, 1 cruiser, and 3 BBs with 4 DDs still in good shape, but in need of help with old BBs low on ammunition. 6:15, General Quarters, enemy alert. 6:45, Captain read message from Admiral Halsey's and Carney to crew of New Jersey. They said we had broken the back of the Jap fleet by our action today. It was with regret that we couldn't go in and finish off the cripples in the morning battle, being only 3 hours away from making contact when our presence was needed to back up the 7th Fleet and our invasion forces at Leyte. Captain added a few words saying we were doing as much to win the war as the Flyers by just being a fleet in being, the most powerful task force afloat, a force to be reckoned with whenever the enemy decided to go into action against us. Said crew had done a fine job out here bringing the ship from a hawk of iron to what it is today. Said there was a possibility of a surface engagement tonight after midnight. Then 5:55, secured from General Quarters. Certainly was good news to hear those people say we gave the Japs a shellacking today. The Jap news report claimed a lot of damage to our force off of Leyte in this evening newscast. And that's the last entry for the 25th. The journal only exists in the museum's collection. We're still working on digitizing it. However, these other documents that we referenced for this video all exist at the National Archives. You can find them online. In fact, we're going to post links to all of these on my Facebook page. Just go on Facebook, look for Ryan Szymanski. They'll be on there. That's the easiest place to post links like this. So feel free to read through them and see what the battleship was doing throughout the battle. Do you agree with Captain Holden in his message to the crew that the battleship was doing a fine job just being a fleet in being? Or do you think she could have done more? Let us know in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find about us and the channel. Thanks for watching.
And we knew we were storming north, and we learned later that we were decoyed with a small force up north of the Philippines, and we did a 180 turn and said, why are we sailing south? And what happened is the Japanese sneaked back through the Philippines, and they were left really with some destroyers protecting the smaller aircrafts, those smaller aircraft carriers. And we got back there a little bit late, and they suffered very serious losses from the Japanese.
That they were headed away, and he was free to go after the carriers. Well, Admiral Kinkaid, who was protecting the landings down at Leyte, wanted to know if the straits were protected. So he radioed Halsey, and Halsey told him everything was okay. You know, I don't know how they talked to each other, but anyhow, he lets Kinkaid know everything's okay. Kinkaid figures everything's okay, but it wasn't. We were completely sucked out. The Jap fleet during the night turned around and came back through the straits, and they headed south for Leyte. What they ran into was those jeep carriers. They sunk a couple of them. But in any event, by the time we got the news, we were too far north. We turned around. Halsey left some of the cruisers behind, and he left the carriers, some of our carriers, to handle that outfit up there. And we were headed south again for the Surigao Straits. We pounded along all night long. When we got there, everything was empty. It was all over.
That's about the time when it invaded Leyte that we was patrolling at midnight at the Straits of San Bernardino, and this big Japanese came through at midnight. That's when we sunk it. Oh, that was an awful invasion. Just it's the horrors of war. I got used to it. It was routine every day. I didn't ever have a dull minute. Everything was new.
We were being led by Admiral Halsey to believe that we were going to be involved in some one-on-one arrangements, meaning ship on ship type stuff. And we stayed awake all night long at general quarters. And yeah, I was a little nervous about knowing that I was going to be shooting shells at a ship and he's going to be shooting back at me. That scared me a little bit.
Was that the Battle of Leyte Gulf?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Halsey took some flack for heading north and leaving the landings unguarded. What do you?
If he were here today, I would say that I believe he might have cut and run a little bit.